Amazing. So we'll get started, and I imagine a few more people will join us within the next kind of 5 minutes or so. But hi everyone, thanks so much for putting in the chat where you're coming from. There's so many locations coming through, which is brilliant. So my name is Kelly McCormack. I'm the Events and Communications Officer for the Doctoral College. I've left my camera off today just briefly because sometimes it can affect with my internet connection. But if you can't hear me or anything like that, then just let me know in the chat. The chat is there to be used throughout the session today. You can put comments, you can put questions, whatever you want in there, and you can let us know if you're having any technical difficulties as well. So welcome to Café Research. It's the second online version that we've done throughout 2020, which has been really fun and incredible to organise. And we've got 3 wonderful speakers. So just before we go on to how the event's going to run, a couple of future event dates that you might want in your diaries is on the 2nd of December, we have something called Images of Research, which is quite a big event for us, where 22 shortlisted images will be available for you guys to view and vote for your 2 favourites. It's a really enjoyable day, so keep an eye out in your email for that. On the 22nd of February, we have another doctoral inaugural lecture session where previous speakers, previous PhD students that have gone on to graduate return and tell us about their research. 23rd of February next year, another Café Research, but this will be around about lunchtime here in the UK at 1 o'clock. So again, we'll have another 3 speakers and another 3 topics then. And 31st of March, just another doctoral inaugural lectures to have in your diary whilst we get those speakers confirmed for that. So for today, like I mentioned, we've got 3 speakers. They're all going to speak for about 15 minutes each. Please keep your mic and your video off as not to disrupt the speakers throughout the session. The session will be recorded. I've already hit record. I've made sure of it. If you have an issue during the session, please use the chat function as to not interrupt the speaker. And feel free to ask questions throughout. So the aim is that we'll let all 3 speakers do their presentations, and then we'll have kind of a group discussion at the end where you can ask your questions via me, but you can ask them throughout the session so you don't forget them. Let us know where you're tuning in from, as you have been doing on the chat, and feel free to use some of our hashtags. Hashtag DIL there is wrong, it should be Café Research. So yeah, that's all from me. I'm really looking forward to these talks. I have been for weeks now. So I'm really pleased that you're all joining us. So the first person to speak is Jenni. So if I can just get her on her camera or audio or however she wants to present, I'm just going to bring up her slides and then I'll give her a formal introduction.
Hello. I can hear me. I sound weirdly echoey though.
You sound good. You sound good. Cool. So Jenni Hunt is in her 4th year of her PhD at the University of Leicester, supervised by Professor Richard Sandel. She is interested in the relationship between museums, social justice and inclusion, in particular how museums present disability and how they are working with disabled people to share these stories. So Jenni, over to you. I'm going to go on mute.
Okay, hoping everyone can hear me. Yeah, thank you all so much for coming today. I know that especially if you're coming from England, it's a bit of a frantic day as everyone is rushing around trying to do the last minute things. So it means a lot to me that you've come here rather than going out and queuing for loo roll or whatever. Thank you. So this talk is looking at how museums are working with groups of disabled individuals to best represent their stories and the lives of those that have come before, acknowledging the expertise that comes with lived experience. I want to examine how museums have worked with disabled groups to share their stories and in doing so empowered disabled individuals in the museum, whilst also combating negative stereotypes around disability and difference. My talk will involve an explanation of the work museums have done around social justice and disability, highlighting 2 cases of collaborative work and what was achieved through this. Kelly, I know you were going to move on my slides, but has that worked?
Yeah, that's all good. Take it with you, yeah.
Okay, I can move my own slides. Excellent. Okay, so museums are showing an increased interest in uncovering stories from minority groups, suggesting a realisation that museums need to aim to be representative and socially purposeful, engaging with current social issues rather than focusing on a narrow and traditional understanding of the elite. Representing groups such as disabled people, who have often been shown negatively, can be a challenge. Museums have been cautious, afraid of replicating past abuses or dehumanising those that they show. One way to ease these fears, while still allowing representation of a group who have faced widespread discrimination and prejudice, is to enable those with lived experience of disability to share our views. This provides both an opportunity to explore the complexity of disability history and also to empower disabled people by treating our experiences with respect and backing up our voices with the institution's power. Stories of disability have often been hidden away, but as museums come to spend more time exploring stories that they have previously overlooked, they are coming to the foreground. That such stories are being told at all is a huge step forwards, but questions remain over how they are told and whose voices are heard, often made more difficult by the way that disabled people were often silenced in the past. I've just seen someone say they can hear no sound. I hope the rest of you can hear sound. Okay, thank you guys. Sorry, it's slightly unnerving just speaking into the void. Museums can choose to show disabled individuals in a respectful way, which imbues our lives with a sense of value, considering the objects and images they display as carrying stories that the public should know about. Sandel examined some problems that museums face, concerns over tokenism, outing someone, and of naming individuals shown. Disability might be a part of someone's identity, but it is not the entirety of it. Choosing to focus on that aspect of a person can seem tokenistic or reductive. Furthermore, disabled individuals might not want their disability widely known. President Roosevelt, for example, tried to keep his disability hidden during his lifetime. However, by revealing his disability, it is possible to challenge views about the capacity of disabled individuals and to show their history. Similarly to revealing the LGBT identity of a historic figure, the decision as to whether or not to identify someone as disabled needs to be made carefully, considering both the feelings of the individual and living relatives and potential impact on the audience's views. Another difficulty that museums may face is that they often do not have the names of users of objects or the subjects of images. Shocking nameless images can cause repulsion among viewers, showing the person portrayed as irrevocably other. To tackle this, museums can use the voices of those who have shared similar experiences, and in doing so create a nuanced portrayal even for cases where an individual's identity has been stolen. I aim to gain an understanding of the different ways that disabled individuals can be empowered by being handed back control over our own stories. When considering attitudes towards disability, there are a range of models that are used. Doctors, and indeed museums, have traditionally used the medical model, in which the flaw lies within the body of the disabled individual and requires medical intervention to cure in order to normalise them. Disabled people, especially those involved in disability rights, often find this model rather insulting, as it positions us as the problem. Instead, we prefer the social model. Here, a disabled person is disabled not just by our impairment, but instead by how society restricts us and places barriers in our ways. By removing barriers, the disabled individual is able to participate within society. Which of these models is chosen affects how difficulties are understood and which solutions are proposed. So as you can see here on this image, the solution is either a medical cure or providing a ramp. Having considered why representation of disability is important, I now turn to how museums can represent disability, focusing on the idea of shared authority and acknowledging expertise from experience. Silences by museums can further oppression, and representation can help to shape audience views and understandings of at times difficult topics. Therefore, the voices that we hear within museums are significant. Allowing other voices than that of the curator to be heard within the museum is particularly important for groups that have often previously been spoken over or ignored, and disabled people comprise one such group. with a history of institution and separation from society. In the 1970s, there has been a concerted pushback against the segregation, challenging stereotypes around disabled people as being helpless charity cases or else inspirations. After a long history of serving as research subjects, often at the cost of their health and at points of their lives, disabled people campaign for an active role within research, an idea summarised by the slogan, "Nothing about us without us." The key concept here is that research which involves disabled people should benefit us and allow our voices to be heard rather than pursuing a research agenda which devalues us. When creating an exhibit that tells the story of disabled people, it is important to involve our voices. Not only is it ethically important for a group that has so long been silenced, but it also enables greater depth and understanding to be revealed, as those with lived experience will have our own knowledge to share. Having explained the theoretical basis driving my research, I now turn to some case studies. The Wounded exhibition at the Science Museum in 2016 to 2018 focused on World War I. However, at the very end of the exhibition, there was a section which was co-produced by veterans of modern conflicts living with PTSD who were working with combat stress. They co-curated a case, writing their own labels. In this way, hearing the participants' own words imbued the objects with meaning. The participants also made a short film which reflected their experiences. At the start of this project, it was created in total anonymity. However, as the project went on, participants wanted their contribution acknowledged, with their names used and faces seen in the video, which showed their pride in what they had created. The National Disability Arts Collection and Archive exists to preserve the story of the disability arts movement, recording voices and artwork of key figures. The majority of the staff are disabled, and all of the artworks collected are by disabled artists. In this case, disability participation is not a film or a display case, but rather fundamental to the entire project and the story that it tells. It embodies the idea of nothing about us without us, as disabled artists and activists tell their lives in their own words. This turn towards co-creation and working with participants, I argue, reveals how some museums are responding to the ethical imperatives presented by the disability rights movement and disability studies scholars for agency, involvement and empowerment in the way disabled lives are researched and presented, captured in the campaign's slogan, "Nothing about us without us," and considering how they can encourage a mixture of voices to be heard. Dodd, Jones and Sandel raised the idea of trading zones in order to empower disabled people, areas in which people with different specialisms can come together and collaborate on a project. The lived experience of disabled individuals is valued, as is the expertise of museum professionals. By respecting a range of different kinds of expertise, everyone who participates is able to learn and gain from their experiences. While I was conducting my interviews, I asked participants why they thought that these exhibitions were being held now. For some, the focus was on sharing fascinating stories or increasing representation. For others, the focus was on an idea of wider resonance, with stories that were relevant beyond the disabled community that needed to be shared. For the Science Museum, the initial reason for a participation project was in order to get HLF funding. The end result persuaded the curator that such participation projects can be highly successful. All of the museums seemed to realise they had gained a lot from taking part in these projects, enjoying the stories that they were able to tell. Disability is an overlooked part of our shared history, with media representations of scroungers and cheats leading to an increase in hate crime. It is therefore vital that depictions of the past and present acknowledge disabled realities. Presenting the diversity of humankind is both historically accurate and ethically important. By addressing this topic, participation projects have proved that they are worth doing as they prioritise the voices of experts with lived experience. They enable a more complex understanding of a situation, bringing valuable depth of knowledge alongside shifting power and adding uncertainty and complexity. This uncertainty reflects the real world in a way that simplistic views will not, and therefore is to be valued, even and especially when it is challenging. Thank you all ever so much for listening. I hope that this has helped you to learn a little bit about disability representation in museums, its importance, and the work that's being done to improve it. My Twitter account is our object, in which I post a museum object linked to disability daily, and I believe Kelly just posted my email address into the chat box. Thank you all ever so much.
Amazing, thank you so much, Jenny. That was brilliant. Thoroughly enjoyable and really well presented. So yeah, thank you so much. So amazing. So you can chill for the moment and enjoy the next two presentations. I'm just going to get the next one set up. If Judith wants to get her camera or her audio ready, that would be great.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, Judith. Amazing, cool. So yeah, feel free to put some questions in the chat if you have any questions for Jenny, and then we'll come to them at the end. But now it's over to Judith, so I'll just give you so Judith Vocker is a third-year PhD student at the Birth Centre for Holocaust and Genocide at the University of Leicester. She is supervisor of Café, Dr. Richter. Her thesis was funded by the Midlands Four Cities Doctoral Training Partnership. She is currently a junior fellow at the Vienna Wessenthal Institute. So over to you, Judith.
Thank you. I hope everyone can hear me okay. If not, I can turn off the video at some point, just so the connection is better. So I'll just start. I only have 50 minutes, and thank you everyone for coming. I really appreciate it, especially in light of the elections going on. So thank you very much for coming. I'll use this time to divide my talk into 4 or 5 different topics. So first of all, I will show you a case study that I've been working on, and then I will give you some more information about the general court material and documents I'm working with, and then I will give you more of a historical background of the introduction of German law and jurisdiction in the general government, and then at the very end I will talk a little bit about the German judges who were stationed in occupied Poland. So as we can see on these documents, the Polish Jew and merchant in Nuremberg was sentenced to 6 months of imprisonment and a fine of 100 Polish zloty because of injury by the special court in Warsaw in January 1940. He had confessed of having sold canned cucumbers for a higher price than in pre-war times. The verdict was made according to paragraph 302 of the Reich Criminal Code, which was supposed to ensure a fair competition between merchants. In March of the same year, the State Prosecution Office in Warsaw demanded that the defendant should be arrested as soon as possible and brought to the ghetto prison. However, over 2 years later, the special court is still requiring about the whereabouts of the defendant. And one of the last documents of his file, and I think it should be on this slide, yeah, on the right-hand side, dates back to October 29th, 1942, so nearly 3 years after the sentence was announced, in which the Polish criminal police files a request to the citizens registration section to indicate the last address of Nuremberg, which applies to me that he still hasn't served his court sentence. So I asked myself, what do court cases like this tell us, and why should we study them? I argue that they recount a more detailed history of the complications of the everyday life of all defendants who face legal prosecution through the Nazi regime in occupied Poland. From a microhistorical point of view, analyzing court material from occupied cities can allow us to recreate a more diverse perspective of the personal, religious, and intellectual lives of their Polish, ethnic German, and Jewish population. In regard to the latter, these documents often encompass the last trace of Jewish life in Poland, and filling the missing information of victims of the Holocaust who left no trace in the standard works, but perished after or even during these investigations. A more thorough analysis of the German legal sphere allows us to study the treatment of not only the Jewish, but for the first time also the Polish and ethnic German population. Each of these files contains between 2 and several hundred pages of information about the defendant and all other parties involved in the trial: the complainant, witnesses, police officers, or members of the court. Furthermore, they are not only a reflection of conflicts that characterized different societies during the war, they also represent a portrait of their life and eventual death as a result of the Nazi reign in occupied Poland. The extermination and the difficulties of their daily lives under occupation is exemplified in the charges they faced. They include, but are not limited to, smuggling, theft, assault, murder, bribery, illegally leaving or entering the ghetto, and so forth. All cases usually consist of investigation or arrest records, correspondences between different police stations, birth and death certificates, statements of the victims, interrogations, testimonies, and eventually the verdict. Through them, we can trace the history of the accused, whether they were a repeat offender, their age, occupation, education, and religion. This approach allows us to create a portrait, both legal and demographic, of all defendants who faced German courts in the general government. Nazi-occupied Poland already plays, if not the most important role in the study of the Holocaust, since half of the victims were Polish Jews, and half of the German perpetrator documents relate to occupied Poland. So the mere scope of primary sources makes it possible to study and reconsider its history during World War II in more detail. How exactly these documents survived the war, however, is still heavily debated. For Warsaw alone, so one of the cities I'm looking at, around 6,000 files from the German court and 2,000 files from the special court are stored in branch offices of the Polish State Archives. However, these collections do not seem to be complete because, according to the monthly and yearly reports from the Warsaw District Administration, hundreds of death penalties were pronounced each month, but the originals are nowhere to be found. So the introduction of the German jurisdiction in the general government was done at the very onset of occupation. Soon after the invasion of Poland and the establishment of the so-called general government for the occupied Polish territories, the regime put a two-tier system of justice in place. In January 1940, the general governor, Hans Frank, determined that, quote, where German security or economic interests are affected, German laws apply. Polish law otherwise remains in force, end of quote. In other words, while the violations of German wartime regulations were automatically referred to German courts, common crimes were still heard by Polish ones. The German jurisdiction and legal sphere was introduced in the general government at the very onset of occupation as a measure to maintain a social order, as well as using it as a political tool. Especially through publishing court verdicts in newspapers and banners, it can be regarded as a deterrent for its residents to adhere to the rules and laws of the occupiers. This task, however, became an increasing challenge since the judiciary had been steadily tightened by the NSDAP in the early 1930s, which reached its peak with the beginning of the war, when German laws were further tightened and additional decrees introduced, especially those that claimed death penalty. In traditional German law, the accused are covered by the concept of in dubio pro reo, and when in doubt, in favor for the accused. However, the regime seemed to assume the opposite, because everything was done in order to punish a criminal offender, since even legal ethics of ancient Rome were abolished, such as the concept of nulla poena sin lege, which means no punishment without a law. The regime had introduced decrees that could be applied to crimes committed before they even came into force. And now I want to spend some time talking about the German judges that worked in occupied Poland. And one of the ways I was trying to find out more about them, because I didn't have any names, I looked up their signatures in the collection of the Reich Ministry of Justice and the Federal Archives in Berlin. And as a general observation, I found 2 judges who worked there, and they were male members of the NSDAP, averagely skilled jurists, and usually in the 1930s or 40s when they were transferred to occupied Poland. What you see here on the right-hand side is the first page of a personal file from the Federal Archive, and it mainly gives us information about the professional, political, and academic background of, in this case, Dr. Wilhelm Zehnpfennig. He was born in Cologne, my hometown actually, in 1907. He was Catholic, married with 2 children. He passed the state exam in 1934 with average marks and earned his doctorate in 1939. And I hope this works now. In several of these recommendation letters written by higher legal officials, it was mentioned that 10 Pfennig had joined the NSDAP and the SR in 1933. He eagerly pursued his duty as a lawyer and was, quote, extremely tough in nature. And these two assessments is where it gets interesting, because the president of the higher regional court in Cologne described him as, quote, highly skilled and careful, conscientious lawyer. His work is clear, thought out, and experienced, and no concern was given about his, quote, political attitude. However, the district court president stated that, quote, in civil matters, his practice was so little extensive that an assessment of his performance is hardly possible, but was not beyond mediocrity, end of quote. In March 1938, Pfennig applied to become a lawyer in the Higher Justice Service, but his former employer sent a letter to the Reich Minister of Justice claiming that he does not support his application since he's only a so-called average lawyer. This was supported by the Attorney General, according to whom Pfennig had mentioned he would be willing to practice in the Eastern Territories. So as a result, he was transferred to the Special Court in Warsaw in April 1940. And even though he was exempt from military service in late March 1941, a letter from August 1943 mentions that Pfennig was called into military service in April that year. And after this, the circumstances surrounding him became very interesting and very confusing. Anyone who can read German will have more insight into this. He returns to military service and wants to resume office in the general government. However, he was transferred back to the Reich because both Justice Departments stated that he is not sufficiently skilled to be reinstated as a lawyer in either the State Prosecution Office in Krakow or the District Court in his hometown. The President of the Justice Department even goes as far as stating that, quote, Pfennig was perceived as a burden by the State Prosecution Office in Warsaw, end of quote, and therefore had to be transferred to Krakow. Similarly to several dozen, if not hundreds of German jurists who investigated and passed thousands of death penalties based on harsh, unlawful grounds, Pfennig was never indicted in a post-war trial. As a result, 70% of the German legal staff who were members of the Nazi Party were reinstated in the state service in West Germany as early as the 60s. At a time when the first former judges, lawyers, and state prosecutors faced the first post-war trials in Western Germany. Some of them were accused and brought to court by their own wives, such as in the case of Gerhard Göde. He was involved in shootings of Jews in Warsaw, Lublin, and Lviv. And the State Prosecution Office in Lübeck opened the largest trial of its kind in 1971. And Dr. Martin Ernst Leitzmann was among the several hundred defendants. He was the lead judge at the Special Court in Warsaw and was accused of sending several hundred death penalties against Jews. And these death penalties that he signed and the proceedings that preceded them were now considered mock trials primarily aimed at murder. Witnesses reported that up to 50 death penalties were pronounced each day, so in total around to 1,000 to 1,500 during the time in office. And interestingly, the legal basis adopted at the time was now considered murder according to paragraph 211 of the German Criminal Code. The same tribunal also found that the imprisonment of Jews in ghettos had been done on no legal basis. However, most of these post-war trials in Western Germany ended in an acquittal because the claims were time-barred or the defendant had already passed away. So to conclude, documents of the German courts allow us to learn about and to understand the functioning of the German jurisdiction during the Nazi occupation of Poland, that they exist in the first place, and why they were already established at the onset of occupation. They allow a novel insight into the lives of those living in the general government under foreign law, and by their sheer volume and geographic scope, enable new research perspective as they contain hitherto hidden stories of all members of society, whose stories have so remained unheard. The cases go beyond the relations between the Nazi regime and the treatment of Poles or Jews, as conditioned by the war or by Nazi propaganda, but also the relations to their fellow countrymen. And these decisions inevitably died at the hands of German judges who were transferred to occupied territories to conduct proceedings based on newly formed in unlawful decrees. What made them into men committing war crimes, turning the juridical sphere into a political instrument to further support the destructive Nazi regime, still remains heavily under-researched. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Judith. That was brilliant. So interesting, so clear, and really yours as well. And yeah, such a privilege to have you call in from Vienna. So thank you so much. Yeah, just relax for the next presentation, and we'll have you back for questions after that.
Thank you.
So if Majda wants to start sharing her screen and get ready, I'll give you a little introduction in a second. Yeah, apologies everyone, I had some street noise in the background, so I put my earphones in to do the introduction, and I'm pretty sure they are broken, so thanks for letting me know. I'm sure we'll get them sorted. So yeah, Majda looks like she's getting ready, so I'll just do an introduction now. So Majda has written, by background, I am a pharmacologist and currently have an interest in understanding chronic restlessness, what drives it, and what the future holds for adults suffering with breathlessness. So Majda, whenever you're ready. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Can everyone hear me? Is that okay? Oh, I can't see comments.
Yeah, all good.
Thank you very much for attending today. You are here in your fall. So today I'm going to speak to you about chronic breathlessness, and this is one of the studies that makes up my PhD. I guess let's start. So chronic breathlessness is a common symptom of many different conditions and diseases, including asthma, COPD, heart failure, a burden to the individual as well as the healthcare. To the individual, horrible feeling, very, very scary symptom, and they can't do their daily activities because obviously when they're breathless, they don't want to do anything to exert them. So the burden to the healthcare is also a big thing because it could be due to many different things, and it's a challenge to know when it's abnormal because is it actually abnormal for the individual? Could it be a marker of disease, or could it be a marker of adverse outcomes? Could it be a result of change of drug? Could it be a result of change of lifestyle? Because breathlessness can be altered by age, weight, fitness, and so on. So most, well, 2/3 of cases have a cardiorespiratory cause, and this does include asthma, COPD, and heart failure, like I previously said. So the severity of breathlessness is associated with prognosis. So it's known that the more breathless one person is, it has a higher risk of mortality. So, but the thing is, there's not much research or there's limited information as to what is driving the prognosis. So chronic breathlessness may be a syndrome. There's a couple of papers out there that state this, and that the negative effects that come with that are common within all of these conditions that have breathlessness as a symptom could be due to the symptom itself rather than the disease. However, it has not been objectively defined. So patients with COPD commonly present with exertional shortness of breath as well. So it's one of the common symptoms. And there are many secondary effects of COPD, which include low physical activity, mainly because a patient, if they are feeling breathless, they don't want to exert themselves because no one really likes to be breathless. And they know, for example, if they do exercise, they become even more breathless, and it takes longer for them to recover. But instead, most of them, or as reported, majority of them prefer to avoid doing exercise, which then leads to this spiral of physical inactivity. So the spiral of physical inactivity is the diagram on the right. I don't know if it's on your right, but as you can see, it says the airflow limitation. So people, there's limited air airflow. With asthmatics, also it's more COPD. So there's limited airflow, which leads to dyspnea, so their breathlessness, they're even more breathless. And they become inactive, like I said, because they don't want to exert themselves. And then they have a poor quality of life, which leads to deconditioning because they're not using their muscles as much, muscle impairment, and it's just a downward spiral from there. And it can in fact affect it can cause anxiety action as well within the population. The spiral of physical is not disease specific because it can be seen in many different conditions. However, we do know one thing, that it's always initiated by breathlessness. So this is where it fits in with chronic breathlessness being a syndrome, can potentially being a syndrome because of this spiral of physical inactivity. And this can lead to an increased cardiometabolic risk due to the consequences of the symptom, due to the physical inactivity. So COPD and heart failure are associated with an increased cardiometabolic risk. And this could be due to systemic inflammation, or the disease, and also secondary consequences. So those are the ones that are the physical inactivity, total muscle impairment, physical deconditioning. The population of breathless adults that are awaiting the diagnosis are undescribed, and the long-term outcomes are unknown. So this population of adults are waiting for diagnosis so that they can be or slotted into a condition or like a specialty, so that the services, the healthcare know what kind of a device to give to people. But sometimes the services are too specialised, and we actually need two specialties. For example, if we're looking at respiratory, we need the cardio service as well as the respiratory service to understand a breathless patient and what is going on in their body. That's why these patients are undescribed, because everyone needs, most healthcare systems would like to see a patient with their condition. So suffering with breathlessness could potentially lead to secondary consequences, similar to the ones seen in COPD. I'll be talking about cardiometabolic risk. So cardiometabolic risk is the risk of developing heart problems or cardiovascular disease and or diabetes in the future. But there are indicators of this cardiometabolic risk. You have tests, and they'll say to you whether you're on increased risk of developing heart problems and or diabetes in the future or not. And these are more assessed as surrogates for long-term health condition. It can tell you a lot of things about people's health in the future as well. Yes. So, aortic stiffness is a surrogate marker, and it's used as a marker of cardiometabolic risk. So, a paper has found that for every increase, 1 meter per second increase in aortic stiffness has been associated with an increase 15% of an occurrence of a cardiovascular event. And that is why it links in with the cardiometabolic risk. Now, aortic stiffness can be measured in many different ways, and it is the measurement of aortic stiffness is called pulse wave velocity. It's considered to be the gold standard of measuring aortic stiffness. So you can use them in various different measures or assessments. There are that are invasive, there are ones that are like cardiac MR. The one I use in my study is a non-invasive measure, and it's called a SPIG measure. And you can see the photo on the right, that is how you measure it. So it's a blood pressure cuff that is around the lady's thigh, and that will give us the reading from the femoral artery and a very small sensor around the neck. It does look like it's quite dangerous. I promise you it's not. It doesn't inflate like a blood pressure cuff under her neck. It's only a little bit that inflates, and it's the rest of it's just all Velcro. So it just inflates enough to get the carotid to pulsate. So with that, there are many limitations. The body surface measurements to estimate the artery length, because as you can see, the person taking the measurements is just using a tape measure, and that doesn't account for the pathways of the vessels. And the cardiac MR is actually recommended for aortic stiffness because it gives us more of a precise reading. However, due to funding issues, we couldn't use that in my study. I totally forgot to explain what aortic stiffness is. We measure the time it takes for blood to move, or the velocity, how fast blood moves from one place to another. And for pulse wave velocity, we measure from the carotid to the femoral. So my study is called Comparing Cardiometabolic Risk Indicators Between People with and Without Breathlessness, and in short, it's called Calmer Breath. This study, the aim is to compare indicators of future cardiometabolic risk between patients with unexplained chronic breathlessness at the point of referral to secondary care. So once you've gone to a GP and your GP has referred you to the consultant or the doctor in the hospital, the specialist, to find out more. And we'll be comparing the results of this group with age and gender matched individuals without breathlessness. And for the purpose of the study, explain breathlessness at the point of referral is the participant having a normal BMP, spirometry that does not indicate airway obstruction, normal chest x-rays, normal hemoglobin, and normal electrocardiogram ECG. And it just shows that if all of this is normal at your GP and you're still breathless, you'll be referred, and will then the doctor at the hospital will find out more and most likely give you a diagnosis. And that is, at that point, is where I come in and recruit these people that are happy to take part. The second aim is to compare the potential secondary consequences of breathlessness between adults with and without breathlessness. So the participants that we have in the Calmer Breath study, we only want adults that are above the age of 40. We want them to be referred to the breathlessness clinic at Glenfield Hospital after normal initial investigations. We want them to have persistent exertional breathlessness for over 2 months, to be able and willing to give informed consent, to be mobile and complete questionnaires. Our exclusion criteria is if there is a explanation for that person's symptoms, and if they have any cancers or any illness that's going to result in a prognosis of less than 1 year. Healthy volunteers, we want them also to be above the age of 40, although we have age and gender matching them, and to be healthy with no existing conditions and not exercise training, because when one person is exercise training, they get fitter and their pulse wave velocity gets better. So we want them to be sedentary so that it matches with the breathless participants' exercise levels. So the primary outcome of this study is the aortic stiffness. That will be using pulse wave velocity, as this is a surrogate for risk, as it says. Our secondary outcomes are an investigation of the metabolic profile. So this is looking at the diabetic signs. And we'll be looking at their HbA1c level, their fasting glucose. And we'll be doing an oral glucose tolerance test, which is when a participant comes in, fasted in the morning. We take 1 little bottle of blood, their glucose levels, and we give them a glucose solution to get like Lucasade. And then they have to sit for 2 hours, and then we'll take one more to see how their body metabolizes glucose. Comparing measures of cardiopulmonary exercise testing between the 2 groups. So the cardiopulmonary exercise test is also called the CPET, in short. And this is a measure of someone's fitness. It's done across many different populations, from people who are very poorly to footballers and cross-country skiers. They're the ones that have the highest, what's it called? The highest VO2 max, which is their measure, so the most fittest. And we're also looking at the descriptors of the populations. They are potential secondary consequences. These include anthropometric measures, their height, weight, BMI, blood pressures, lots of bloods, DEXA scans, so we understand how much muscle mass each group has and what the average, and compare them between the two. Frailty measures, questionnaires, and daily physical activity measures. So my study design is broken down into 2 visits. On the first visit, they come in and we do the consent, we do their height, weight, BMI, their blood pressures, the DEXA scan, a 4-meter gait speed, which isn't your normal pace, from 4 meters, and the exercise test. And then we give out the activity monitors, and then they come back for visit 2, where they come in fasted. If they're diabetic, we don't do this visit. We usually pop it all into one visit. There is no need to do an oral glucose test if you know someone's really diabetic. And we also do the stiffness of arteries, a questionnaire, and quadricep strength. So the statistical analysis side of things will be carried out on SPSS. And for the baseline descriptors, we will they will be described as mean plus or minus standard deviation. And for the comparison of the 2 groups, an independent t-test will be used, or a non-parametric equivalent. And the CPET results will also be compared between the 2 groups using independent t-test. So the comparison of aortic stiffness between the 2 groups will be split into 2 different statistical analysis. One is unadjusted and compared between the groups using a t-test or non-parametric equivalent. And the second analysis would be adjusted for covariates, including BMI and daily physical activity, because we know that BMI and physical activity have an effect on stiffness of the arteries. So we want to see whether the results are still the same after adjusting. And the comparing of the metabolic profiles, they will also be the same. They will also be analysed the same as the aortic stiffness. So for my results to date, these are up until March, before the pandemic came in. We can see that we did not age and gender match the participants, as I started recruiting a lot of healthy controls. We would continue, and it would be easier to match them with a breathless patient. But instead, we didn't manage, which is fine. And you can also see there's a difference in BMI. You can see that patients with breathlessness, can you see my cursor? I'm not sure. You can see patients that are breathless have a much higher BMI than the healthy controls. You can also see that they have higher back years, smoking history in comparison to the controls. And the DEXA and physical activity data is yet to be analysed. So as for the primary outcome, you can see that there it shows patients with breathlessness have a higher pulse wave velocity, so their arteries are much more stiffer, but that's not a significant difference, so we can't really judge it. So in conclusion, this study has been paused due to the pandemic. But instead, what we've done is we decided to run the same study in patients post-COVID. So what we're going to do is we are going to compare the same measures in people who are post-COVID and suffer with exertional breathlessness, and then compare them with age and gender matched post-COVID adults who are healthy. By healthy, we mean they don't have any other conditions and their health is back to normal. This study will continue to recruit until September 2021. For this bit, the 24 participants in each group is for the post-COVID study I'm currently doing. So the other measures, as I mentioned, are the oral glucose tolerance testing, the DEXA scan, and the cardiopulmonary exercise. I'd like to thank my participants, my supervisor, Dr. Rachel Evans, and my other 2 supervisors and the team for their continuous support. Thank you.
Thanks, Majda. That was wonderful. Thanks so much for presenting. We had a few little audio blips right at the beginning of your presentation, but I think it found itself, and I certainly got all of it and really enjoyed it. So thanks so much. Really interesting how you have to kind of divert your research and really consider COVID and how it's going to change everything. But yeah, really enjoyable. So now is the time for anyone in our audience to put forward some questions for our speakers. So be brave, write them in the chat, and we can go over to our speakers and ask them. So Jenni, if you want to come on mic, we've got a question for you. You can probably see it in the chat yourself, but I'll just I'll read it out as well. So you mentioned the motivations driving these projects changed over the course of some of your case studies, suggesting that the display value / authority associated with these personal testimonies shifted for the practitioners involved. It would be great to hear more about this change. Do you have any thoughts on what could be done to support / accelerate the shift in attitudes within the museum? So really great question, Isabella. But yeah, over to you, Jenni.
Oh, no, thank you. Really good question, Isabella. I think that, yes, there was a definite change because in order to get HLF, which is the Heritage Lottery Fund funding for arts projects, you need to be able to show how it's benefited people and got people involved in heritage when they wouldn't have otherwise been involved, which has kind of led to a lot of these things involving some kind of participatory project in whatever way. So I think in this case with the Science Museum, I think actually working with the people and seeing kind of the quality of the end result that came out would be good. And I think after that, the curator who was involved was much more eager to participate in such events in the future. So I also know that the Science Museum had run a couple of like events associated with opening an exhibition, and therefore that's something where you'll get a lot of museum staff attending. So hopefully they've heard them saying this was actually really successful. I think the funding being linked to it has had a big impact on attitudes. I think also if people kind of had really have had really good experiences, just making sure that they're very explicit about that and making sure that they kind of thank participants and things so that other sites can see what has been done and it's quite clear actually where some of this force has come from. I hope that that was vaguely coherent. I need another coffee, but I'm trying to explain that.
Thanks, Jenni. Yeah, that sounded great. Thanks so much. Any questions, let us know. There's just a lot of positive feedback coming back for all three speakers. You know, really, really great presentations, really to the point, and also providing a clear overview of what you guys are trying to achieve and even some challenges and successes that you've had in the past kind of few years that you've been working on these topics. So really, really great. We'll just give it another couple of minutes to see if any more questions come in. Otherwise, if you're not feeling like you have a question now, or you go away and you think, oh, maybe I should have asked that, and you know, all of our speakers are very approachable and you can get in touch with them and ask them and maybe take this conversation offline, because collaborative working and interdisciplinary working is obviously very much encouraged, and we love it when that kind of thing happens. I can't see any last minute questions coming through. Oh, no, we have one from Jenni. So Judith again. Oh, Judith, sorry. From Jenni to Judith. Judith, you mentioned some of the reports were destroyed. Do you have any idea how much of the total survived? So if you're okay to come on, Mike, and answer that.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Jenni, for the question, because that's something that I've been trying to estimate as much as I can. But I guess the simple comparison between the special court and the German court in Warsaw is very telling. So the special court, there are around 2,200 files. From the German court, around 6,500. And it's surprising to me how different that number is, especially because the special court had a lot of had definitely a lot more proceedings than those 2,000. So I guess that around 4,000 files from the special court in Warsaw were destroyed because they were responsible for conducting those proceedings that were expected to end in a death penalty. So I think we have around a third of the files from the special court in Warsaw that survived the war.
Great, thank you. No other questions coming in, but if we could just get Majda back, I'd just really interested to know from my point of view. You said that you were a pharmacologist before, so how did your journey come from doing that to going into your research topic? Was it did it naturally happen, or is it chronic restlessness? Has it just been something that's piqued your interest for years and years and years? Any comments?
Hello, thank you. It's a really interesting question. So I graduated with a degree in pharmacology and physiology, but I did a placement year in Bristol University, and I shadowed a PhD student, and that kind of opened my eyes to research a lot more. And I found it was really interesting, and I knew that one of my subjects I was very interested in was respiratory. And as I began to look deeper and deeper into respiratory, I did see that breathlessness was a common symptom amongst many different diseases. And then I found this PhD and I applied for it because I felt like it was a perfect fit. And here I am today doing a PhD on chronic breathlessness. It does tie in quite well because obviously we have to talk about their drugs and stuff like that with the patients when they come in, and I've got all the knowledge before. Except when you have to spell drugs, because I'd love to know who actually comes up with the name. But yeah, I guess I hope I've answered your question.
Yeah, you definitely did. That's really interesting. Thank you. Another question for Judith. So Beth says, I got the impression that the judges concerned were not highly valued by German authorities. Is that right?
Thank you, Beth, for the question. Yeah, I think that's probably the correct impression. I mean, unfortunately, I only have those two judges that I was able to find, and I hope to find more in the future as soon as research becomes possible again. But I think most of the time they transferred those judges that couldn't find employment in the German Reich in the 40s and late 30s, because the other case that I found was also a judge who couldn't find employment in his hometown. So I don't know. I'll just answer straight away to the second question. If they were deliberately sidelined, I'm not sure. I think I have too few cases to really argument towards that, but I think that they were just trying to give people employment elsewhere, because yeah, they needed people in the East, and as soon as they didn't find employment in Germany at the time, I think that's really the only thing they could have done. But I really want to do more research in this area. So we'll see what I can find.
Thanks, Judith. Can't really see any more questions coming through, just from Beth saying thank you. So I think we'll leave it there. We'll wrap it up. So that's just on the hour. Thank you so much to our speakers for joining us. Really brilliant presentations. And thank you so much to our audience for joining us. If any of you are interested in speaking at Café Research, then do get in touch with me. I think our speakers would recommend it. I don't think they would disengage you from doing it, but it can be a bit nerve-wracking, whether it's physically or whether it's online. It's all very different nowadays, isn't it? But yeah, we definitely recommend, because it's quite a nice and informal environment for you to just get used to your surroundings and get asked some really thought-provoking questions. So yeah, we'll leave it there. Enjoy the rest of your evening and the afternoon, or wherever you are, and make sure you treat yourself to a nice dinner, lunch or breakfast. And we will have a recording of this up on YouTube. I'm hoping to get it up before the end of the week, so you can refer back to it and have another look if you wish. So yeah, take care everyone and enjoy your evenings. Thanks for all the comments. Keep them coming if you want. Thanks. Bye bye.
Thank you so much.